All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. This is our last day of this summit, and I'm both shocked and sad. We've had so many great days and so many great speakers, and today we have another wonderful speaker. Michael is part of the North Dakota News Cooperative here in North Dakota, and he is a member of the press that I have been working with over the last few years, and I've got to meet him in person and sit down and talk about the Theodore Roosevelt wild horses. So we wanted to include in this summit somebody from the press because we talk a lot about our relationships with our legislators, and that's absolutely important at a state level, a federal level, even county and city levels. But relationship with the press are equally important. I mean, from letters to the editor, like we heard Jen talk about earlier, and op-eds, but also just a personal relationship with the press. And this is something that I've worked hard on over the last few years too, because this is how you elevate your voice. Really, it's another a really good platform to elevate your voice. So I'm going to let Michael talk, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we will ask him after he is done. So it's all yours, Michael.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So I'm Michael Standaert. I'm a correspondent with the North Dakota News Cooperative. We're a nonprofit news outlet here in North Dakota. I've been a journalist since around 1998. Started out in the Midwest in Iowa and Illinois, and made my way to Europe. I was in Europe for a while, a couple of years, and then back in the U.S. in Iowa and California. And then went abroad again. I was in China for about 16 years as a journalist before coming back to the U.S. in 2022, and then ended up here in North Dakota. So I mainly work on feature stories here of statewide interest. So there's not a lot of journalists here in North Dakota, and there's not many people that are covering kind of wider ranging systemic issue stories. And I've done one story on the horses at Teddy Roosevelt National Park, and that one mainly focused on kind of what the impact would be to local businesses if they lost the horses. I hadn't seen anyone really do that angle, so I was curious looking at that. So that's how I reached out to Chris initially, and we met and talked about the situation, and that's how that story developed. I don't have a big presentation, but that said, I can go into a few things. I think when you're reaching out to media and journalists, kind of think like a PR person, maybe when you're pitching that first initial contact. That means kind of having a short, concise idea, possibly suggestions of people to speak to. Everyone is pretty busy, so it's nice to get that kind of little nugget of information. And you kind of want to make the story kind of make the reporter think the story is coming from themselves at some time too. So kind of give them enough leeway that you're not kind of directing them, but kind of having an open-ended, maybe potentially several different ideas. Research the journalists, make sure that they're covering something that you would cover. You don't want to reach out to a cops reporter or kind of spam a bunch of reporters that aren't really covering your area. So, try to be focused in your research of people that want to connect with. I mean, you can always invite them for a coffee. That's helpful. I like to go meet people in person and hear about stories and potential ideas. Reaching out to editors is a good idea because those editors might have a better idea who among their staff would be good for that story. So keep in touch with editors, not just writers and journalists. Look for regional magazines, national coverage that you might be able to kind of link into with whatever's going on in your situation. I think even international would be good at times. I mean, The Guardian, I've written for The Guardian before. They do a lot of kind of environment, climate, animal type stories. When I was working from China, I did a lot of freelance for The Guardian, and they had kind of this section for a couple of years. I don't know if they have it now, but it was called Animals Farmed. So they were interested in any kind of things related to um, issues with animals at the farm level. So like, when I was in China with COVID and all that came up, and the wildlife trade, that was a pretty big area of interest for them. Um, and a good thing to remember is all the publications have a different audience and different readers that they're targeting. So you kind of have to think about that, I think, when you're looking at reaching out to people. Linking different ideas can be helpful as well. So how would they say that? So are there, kind of bigger picture stories going on outside of what your story is that you could potentially link it to? That sometimes helps. Yeah, and that's all I have as far as my notes. So happy to chat and take any questions.
We talked about this for a minute before we came in. You contacted me initially. That's how I found you and how we started building a relationship. What made you contact me? How did we get your attention?
Um, I don't know exactly the initial. So I've been following the story a bit, and following, you know, um, Patrick Springer's stories out of the forum. Um, and I think I had seen something else, and it sparked an idea in me. Like, nobody's really done much on the business side, or I can't remember exactly how it worked out, but I think maybe when we met and talked, and we were speaking about what was going on with the horses and the story itself. I think that came out. I was asking if there's anybody kind of had looked into the business impact if those horses were removed. From the tourism that comes in the area, from other people that bring tours into the park and that sort of thing. So I thought that was an interesting angle to look at, and potentially impactful for preserving the horses in a way too.
So maybe even something too, like you were saying, when we're contacting editors and reporters, having a different angle. I know because we did talk, and we have a small store in Medora, so that I think sparked that conversation. How's this impacting your small business and other small businesses in the area?
Yep.
Um, how much do reporters look at, like, letters to the editor? Like, if there's a heated issue coming up in a letter to the editor, is that something that you guys look at, or that could possibly spark a future story?
I mean, it could. A lot of it, I mean, at a newspaper, it might be the editors assigning things, and the reporters might bring things up too. Um, so that, yeah, sometimes that will spark a story. I mean, in my case, since I'm doing these wider, bigger picture feature stories, I might see something like that and then file it away into a file related to whatever topic it is, and say, okay, here is a possible source for this story if I ever get around to doing that story.
Um, Lori asked a question. Can you give an example of linking a story to a bigger picture story?
So, well, like with the horses. So like if a similar thing with the horses is happening in several different parts of the country, that would potentially make it more interesting for a national story for, National Geographic or one of these bigger publications. So, or any, like climate change is a big one. So any, climate change issue that might be impacting the herds and things like that. So those are just a couple examples. So there's probably many more. You just have to kind of keep your eye out for what might link up.
I don't think I've talked about this before either, but this comes up a lot when I talk to different reporters. And so maybe you can speak about this too. And you touched on it a little bit, but people will ask me, well, in one, it's not like when you talk to me, you're just going to go, well, Chris Command said, so this must be true, right? There is an element of your own investigating that goes on for most reporters, I think. But
Mm,
also, I've had a lot of reporters ask me, do you have somebody I can talk to about that? Do you have somebody that, whether it's a scientific issue or a historical issue, how important is that for us to have those contacts to be able to share to enhance your story? Or how does that enhance your story?
that's, yeah, that's really important to have. So almost every interview I would do, I would say, okay, who else should I be speaking with about, whatever we've spoken about, other suggestions of people to speak to. So, um, for daily news reporters, it's a lot harder to line up a bunch of interviews. So they might just make quick calls and get comments, and those stories end up not being very in depth. But for other people that are following a story deeply, they'll probably, yeah, want to talk to several other people and get a fuller picture of what's going on, and then they'll eventually digest all that information and then encapsulate it into the story. You, you don't want to come off like you're dominating the story and trying to make it just that story, but so being helpful and open and sharing, potentially people to speak with, whether they support your point of view or not, can be very helpful.
Okay. Um, Heather wants to know, um, when a
I'm looking.
smaller organization is writing a press release about a wild horse issue, which would you suggest any ways that we can make that more attractive for outlets to pick it up?
I mean, press releases are kind of the last resort for reporters to really look at. So I think it's more effective to target reporters individually or editors at the papers that you think that the story needs to go to, than writing a press release and then spamming it out and then people don't read it, or they might file it away and they'll read it later. So I mean, I get, I don't know how many, 300 emails a day. So I get a huge number of emails. Um, so I would tailor, I would tailor it to individual journalists if at all possible. So you kind of have to
Well,
do your research, before and really figure out, okay, how is this going to be most effectively taken? And that can include, meeting up for coffee and just kind of chatting, and it might not come to anything, but at least you've established that relationship.
I was just thinking, and maybe this might help, Heather. I know that like here in Dickinson, our chamber does like e-blasts out to the community that we can use. That might be a better place to put a press release, is something like that. Maybe again going back to working, like another outlet is like working with the chamber, and then that would blast out to the community. So a press release may be more effective that way, do you think, than sending it to the press?
Yeah, yeah, possibly. I mean, I would even open it up to, influencers, other media, non-traditional media that most people aren't really thinking about. People with Facebook, a huge Facebook presence, this sort of thing, Twitter, and just reach out individually, I think, and send them a little note about what's going on. Um, that takes a lot more time, of course.
Well, so I'm thinking like if we think about it logically, your job is to write. So if I'm sending you something that's already written, that's not,
No, no. So
no.
I wouldn't, I mean, I would just probably use the press release as, okay, this is little information, but I wouldn't write off of it. I mean, some
Okay.
people possibly would, I mean, especially if they're doing like this, short daily news piece, they would possibly do that. But, you know, higher up journalists and kind of national journalists and people like that aren't going to really go off of a news release. much. They're going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to look for information themselves, because I mean, for them too, it's part of the fun and interest in doing the job is to explore things and kind of put a puzzle together.
So when all this happened initially with the Theodore Roosevelt horses, I kept waiting for the press to report something based off of the Parks press release that they put out. And when nobody did, I literally just started calling every news station, every newspaper in the state and said, "Hey, are you aware of what they just announced?" And then, so that was a better route to go than sending a blanket press release.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's since there's so much coming in, and a lot of these, newspaper outlets are such low staff now. There's so much coming in. It can be difficult to kind of figure out what exactly to cover and what to put in the paper or put up online. So it can be helpful to get calls and say, hey, this is a big issue. You should pay attention to it.
Okay. Would it help for multiple people to call different news outlets? Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
All right.
Because
Um,
yeah, it's like there's so much going on. There's so much potentially to write about or report about, and so few people now, especially in a place like North Dakota, that it can just be helpful to hear from more people, and you're like, oh, okay, that I think there's it should kind of raise the focus of that story. So
okay. Um, Linda wants to know, she asked, do you look at press releases we just talked about and do pictures? She has a tack. I don't know if you mean attract reporters. Um,
let's see, where's that one at?
Linda Kemp. She said attack, but I think that she means attract. So if we send pictures, does that help enhance a story or pique your
Do pictures
attention?
attract? Yeah, it could, especially with the horse's story. I mean, all the horse photos are really good for newspapers and other media.
Okay. And then Vi wants to know, what about a short stories? Many reports made just interviewed and believed BLM lies. How do we respond after? So even, yeah, like press releases that the federal agencies put out that just tell half of a story. How do we?
Well, yeah, reach out to them and tell them that they just did half the story, because I mean, it could be many things. It could be a lazy reporter just taking what's given to them. It could be they didn't have time to really reach out to many other people. It could be a few things. So getting in touch and saying, hey, you didn't get the other half of the story, or other multiple aspects. I mean, usually every story will have, several potential aspects to it, and not just one side or the other.
Janine wants to know, what are your thoughts on the public's inability to get response, facts, updates from the BLM and the Forest Service, even the National Park Service? I'm going to say here in North Dakota, we can't share stories without facts, and they're not forthcoming with providing info timely or in an effective manner. For example, the Modoc Forest states there's a communication freeze, so therefore they can't provide any updates on current roundups on public land.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. I mean, I was based in China for a long time. It was very difficult to get information out of any source, government or otherwise. I come back here and it seems like it's harder than it's been harder than it was before. Just getting people on the phone that can answer a question can be very difficult. And then you send a bunch of emails and nothing ever gets responded to. I don't know. I don't necessarily know the answer. I mean, there's freedom of information requests that can be made, but that can be very time consuming and cumbersome if you really don't know the process, don't really know who the right person to reach out to is. I mean, I'm still, coming back after being away for so long. I'm trying to catch up on some of those things. So, and different organizations will have different rules. So I would just keep calling and trying to keep getting information if you have the time to do it, or urge the reporters that are covering it, if they're covering it from an angle that's looking at that, to to encourage them to really try to call them and pepper them with emails and that sort of thing.
But I think that you guys, the press has the same issues that we do. I've seen a lot of times over the last few years, with different reporting, whether it's in print or, TV reporting, where they'll say we reached out to Theodore Roosevelt National Park and, have not heard a response, or they haven't responded or said no comment. So,
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just the bureaucracy of it, and no one essentially knows if they can comment or say, what the situation is. So they have to all go through this kind of hierarchy of, okay, how do we release this information? How do we say it? So it's become very bureaucratic in a way.
well, I know in my frustration over the years with the National Park Service, and I know you were probably on the receiving end of a lot of my emails to the superintendent, and I would copy the press. She did let me know, I call it her parting gift to me, that when I copy the press like that, it requires a different response. So it's different if I just email her and say, hey, what's going on? And if I email her and you and Pat Springer and say, hey, what's going on? Now there's a whole line of protocol she has to follow to respond properly because the press is involved. So,
Yeah, no, that can be helpful, I think, in some cases. But it's different. I've not really had any dealings with BLM here, so I don't really know exactly what the situation is there. But yeah, different agencies will have different response times and different. Yeah, it's all very different. So it can be helpful if you know of a reporter that's been dealing with BLM a lot. It can be helpful to talk to them and see who they've been in touch with, how they get information. That I think that could be helpful.
Vi wants to know, shouldn't it be of national interest, not just state, as we're talking about public lands, like all states' lands and national parks that we visit?
Yes, yes. I mean, so yeah, target any of those national publications that kind of look at national parks or or lands, or I think it's a national story.
But those can also be Google searches then that we're doing, right? You're saying to um find the paper that will support the audience for the story that we're proposing.
Yeah,
So that's good
I
advice.
mean, National Parks Traveler is a good website that I just recently have been looking at. I mean, there's all kinds of different outlets that you can reach out to.
Linda wants to know, how do you find a news outlet that doesn't have a standard cattle lobby bias? So many stories on wild horses are skewed with misinformation, the BLM and the livestock point out. So how do we find a true non-biased news outlet that's not afraid to challenge the myth of horses do all the damage when all the research shows differently?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I mean, especially in the Midwest and I guess mountain states, you're going to run into that. I just keep explaining your point of view. I think, just keep trying to get your message out to those outlets. Or, yeah, you can reach out to some of these national outlets that might not have as much influence from that side of things.
Vi wants to know, how much follow-up is good without being a pest? So how much can I email you, Michael, before you're like, this girl is just a pain in my neck?
It depends how busy my day's been going, but no, I mean, it's good to kind of keep, I don't mind it when people keep reaching out. I mean, if I'm busy with something else, I'm busy with something else, and that's, it's beyond my control what other people send to me. So it's not anything I would take personally. Um, some other people might have a different reaction. I don't know. So just, yeah, keep in touch, keep things regular. If you know, especially if there's something new that's happened, that's a good time to update somebody with information. Because I mean, for me, I'm covering essentially any kind of story across the state, it would, I don't keep track of these things on a daily basis. So it's helpful to have somebody come up to you and say, okay, this thing has changed. You should probably look into it. And then maybe tell them kind of a nugget of what's happened, and then kind of go from there.
So would you recommend this and could this be helpful? So for example, we just got a new congresswoman in North Dakota, Congressman Fedorchak. And I set up a meeting with her office just to say, hi, my name's Chris Kaman. I advocate for the horses in the park. I don't have anything I need you to do right now, but I just want to have a relationship with you. Would that be a similar thing that we should be doing with the press? Just kind of trying to find a local reporter and say, hey, I'd like to get together and just talk to you. Are you aware that this issue is happening? And like a place where you can sit down and say, maybe I always point to Jack Durham. Maybe he's not going to do a story right now, but Jack checks in with me every once in a while just to stay up to date. So when he does write a story, he's prepared. Is
Yep.
that a good maybe way to handle that?
Yes, that's a very good way. And then I also again, as what I said at the beginning, kind of research the reporters to see if that's an area that they would cover.
Okay. Um, what do you think is the possibility that wild horses could be reintroduced in more areas of North Dakota other than just Theodore Roosevelt National Park? Not sure if you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would welcome it personally, but I don't have a I don't have an idea of anybody if anybody's talked about that.
Which say newspapers to go to, as so many town cities aren't even publishing? Maybe do you want to talk about that? And I think that probably over the course of your career, newspaper reporting has changed significantly. Um, so what do
Yeah,
we need to know? What do we need to know about that is like we're contacting the media. I know that a lot of newspapers are very short staffed. I
yeah.
know here in North Dakota, we don't have a lot that print daily anymore, even the online flux has changed things. So what do we need to know about that that would help us?
Which question was that? Let me look in so I can read it.
Um, she just wanted to know like which newspapers do we go to as so many town cities aren't even publishing, but I think that that
Yeah.
brings up like there's just been a change in newspaper reporting in general.
Well, the media is so fractured now as compared to, 30 years ago or so. Um, so this is why I said you do want to kind of look to YouTube influencers, TikTok influencers, um, non-traditional outlets, not just your local paper. Um, there's there's more media now than ever before, so it's just that there's less kind of local news. So I would, just cast your nets a lot wider than maybe thinking of, oh, my local paper or even this kind of a state paper.
But on a local level, I feel like it's important because like now we were just talking about the legislative session. So I need to let people in North Dakota know, and that's where, you know, everybody can testify, but the voice of North Dakota really weighs heavier on people that we're electing.
Yep.
So I think that that's why I think like we talked about, I think that that's a great idea and a great piece of information. We should be treating reporters almost essentially the same way that we are our legislators and trying to establish a relationship. Um, because also too, just like our legislators, you don't know every single thing that's happening in every corner of North Dakota, right? If I don't call you and tell you, there's a fire in my backyard, you don't know that that's happening, correct? So,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on that it's just hard to keep track of everything. And, everybody's watching kind of what's going on nationally too. So it can be good to have somebody just kind of bring you some information and kind of focus you on that topic. Um, and then kind of help you go from there. That can be very helpful.
Vi says also coordinating our advocacy to know what each is doing. I don't know if this is what you mean by, but we were actually just talking about this before we signed on. We've been very lucky as wild horse advocates to have a reporter, Patrick Springer, that works for the Fargo Forum, he was really immersed in the whole story, and so much so that he's actually writing a book about it. So he's quit reporting day to day and he's focusing on his book. But I'm very sad because I don't have somebody to say, hey, this is what's happening now. No matter what was happening, Patrick made a story out of it.
Yeah.
So I was just talking to Michael and said, now who do I talk to? And so we were just actually coordinating that. He is not the person to do that, but hey, this person might. And so he's going to send an introduction. So that's where these relationships are really key. And I think more than we're looking at, we get mad at our legislators and we get mad at the press because you're not doing your job. But again, if we're not letting them know what's happening, um, it goes back to our civic duty. I think has been something that's been coming up over the last few days too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wish, for anything I cover, I wish more people would reach out and kind of tell me what they think is important. Um, it can be hard just for yourself to figure that out. So I'm the only correspondent with North Dakota News Cooperative, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what to cover. And sometimes I don't have an editor, essentially. We have a board. Sometimes I'll send a list of 8 story ideas and say, okay, which are your top 3, just to help me decide, because um, there's so much to write about. There's so much to do and to pick. So, and it can change from week to week. And I might not be interested in your story this week, but I might next week, depending on what's going on. So keep in touch with people, keep, relationships, keep filling them in, even if it doesn't work out right away. Don't be discouraged.
I mean, it seems like we're never at a loss for news stories lately, but I think like what you just said is important too. If we set up that initial meeting and say, hey, this is what I'm advocating for, this is what I want you to know. Maybe you're not going to write a story right now, but it's something that if there is a slow time or you need a piece to fill in something, you might say, hey, there was that girl that
Mm.
emails me every week.
Yeah, I mean, and it could not necessarily be that it's a slow time. It's more like you might be in something at that moment and working on it and kind of deeply engaged in it. And it's hard to shift your focus at that time. So, but having it in the back of your mind that somebody is kind of talking to you, that you should kind of keep an eye on this other story, that can be helpful.
Or even if there's a place where you as a reporter can tie it into a bigger story, correct? Like you were telling us.
Yes, yes. And then, I mean, you should also ask Patrick who else to reach out to. I mean, just if you have a relationship with a reporter, or a meeting, or just contacts, and they said, oh, I can't really do it right now. You can always ask, who do you think could do it, or who do you think might be interested? Don't be shy of checking in with them about that.
Here's my number one. I'm a North Dakotan question I get, so maybe you'll have an opinion. How do you think the new Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, will be? How do you think he's going to be as far as wild horses go? And that's always just our own opinion, but I don't
Yeah,
know how much you've worked with him or how much you know about him or um
I've not had much contact with him. I mean, from the perspective of North Dakota, and protecting the horses at the park here, I think he would be supportive of that, but I don't know how that will work within the infrastructure of the administration. I mean, you would think that it would be more supportive. I don't know how about kind of expanding anything, but kind of retaining the status quo of horses might be. I don't know. I can't really weigh in too much on that.
Janine wants to know if you're working on any big stories that we might be able to tie into right now.
Um, I'm working on a couple things about immigration, so I don't know. There's
Um,
just
I thought of another question. The Fargo Forum, I think, is I think it's the biggest newspaper that we have in North Dakota. and I don't know how much people realize this, and I've only realized this over the last couple of years as we've been advocating. How often is it, how common is it that a newspaper would have, like the Forum has their newspaper, they also have a TV station, they also have radio shows that you can talk to that I've been on several times. And they also have apparently their own like film documentary type company. Is that usually pretty normal for um
Yeah, it
newspaper?
depends. I mean, I don't think like the Bismarck Tribune doesn't really have anything like that. The Forum is a bit more powerful in that sense. But yeah, they could have multiple broadcasting reporting type of arms. So just kind of figuring out who's who and reaching out to the right people can get your story elevated.
Is that something like if we were talking about like the Los Angeles Times or the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times, like maybe we're not going to get our story in print in the New York Times, but maybe they have somebody doing a podcast that we may reach out to and have a better way to use that arm to get in?
Yep, that might work. And I mean, I don't know exactly how those organizations operate. So sometimes things get siloed within a lot of these bigger organizations. So if you talk to somebody, in one part, your story or issue might not get to those other people. So you might have to kind of bounce around between different people within an organization.
Um, do opinion editors normally only run letters to the editor or op-eds when the subject is tagging on to a current news event, or will they run something just out of the blue?
I mean, it kind of depends on what's going on. If there's a bunch of big subjects going on, they might just tackle those current news things. But I mean, you can call them and talk to them. I think, you know, that's always a good choice to make, I think, is just calling and talking to people. They probably don't get enough calls from people, saying, hey, maybe you should look at this.
If you send a letter to the editor, is there a way to follow up and say, hey, I sent the letter? Like, is
Yeah,
there a way to follow up with
I
that?
would just call, I would call an email and, you know, check on it. I mean, it's different from different papers. It's hard to figure out. I mean, I was having a hard time getting my subscription back up and running at this local paper here, but yeah, it can be hard to figure out who to talk to sometimes. So calling and trying to talk to the main editor can get you various avenues to reach out to. I think that's a good choice to make.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? I don't know if I missed anything in the chat. I know there's a lot of comments. Do you see
Yeah,
anything, Heather, that we missed at all?
even
No, I
yeah.
don't, but I did take an absolute ton of notes, and I'm going to take those notes of Michael's suggestions, and I'm going to add them to my website where I have a page about contacting news stations and newspapers and so forth. So thank you for that, Michael. I greatly appreciate it.
Since you work for
No,
Bloomberg, do you have any tips on how to contact anybody there or how to get through to people there?
that's a very intricate organization. So you have to I would look into people who focus on maybe environment and try to reach out to those people first.
Okay.
Um, it's so tricky to figure out who to reach out. They're so big too.
I think that that's the problem. Like, most of us are just small organizations, and we have an issue that we're very passionate about, but when you're competing against stories about, Trump putting tariffs on China and Canada and Mexico, then our stories get pushed by the wayside. So,
Yeah. I mean, I forgot to mention this, but don't forget about freelancers. Don't forget about freelance journalists and writers. So when I was reporting from China, I was on accreditation with Bloomberg Industry Group, but I was essentially a freelancer too. So I could freelance for other outlets at the same time. And it's good to hear from people with ideas if you're a freelancer, because you need to pitch those stories out. So I mean, there's a website, Muck Rack. Do you know Muck Rack?
I think so. I think I've seen it, but I know what that is. I studied in Chicago with DePaul, and I took a couple classes on.
Yeah, there's a website, Muck Rack, that most journalists are listed on, and sometimes it will have a bio. If they put a bio up, they might have, show special interest. But what you can do is, kind of just Google different story topics and look at, who's covering what, and then try to reach out to some of those people, and just keep an eye out on what's being reported, whether it's on horses or something that might be a topic that a reporter is writing on that could potentially write about horses, I think.
Okay.
It's hard. It's kind of hard to explain.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time, and really, I learned a lot today, and I've been dealing with the press for a few years. So, the muckrack thing is interesting because I was just thinking about that the other day. I had a teacher at DePaul that taught a class about, and we talked about that quite often. And I was thinking that all the stuff with the BLM is, and the Park Service and all the bureaucracy is very much a muckracker story. So,
Yeah,
all right, well,
Muckrack
that's good.
good. I think there's a few other ones out there. I'm trying to get reacquainted with some of these too, after moving back. So, but I know I used Muckrack as a freelancer. I would kind of look around to see what other people were covering too. And then just following a lot of news and kind of figuring out, what people are covering can really be helpful.
How helpful is it once a story has been written, if there are letters to the editor that continue to keep that story alive? Is that
Yeah, that's important, because I mean, people have such short attention spans now that they're going to forget about your story, 30 seconds after reading it, sometimes. So, keep the topic out there and keep writing, letters to the editor, or reaching out to the reporters about potential stories if things are changing, if there's a change to the status quo, that sort of thing.
okay? Do you have an email that you would want to share if people have questions? Do you want to put it in the chat
Yes. Let's see.
so that we can add to your 300 emails a day?
Well, this one is good because I don't get as many emails to this one, to this
Okay.
Proton. But I check it a little bit less often. So,
Okay. So there's his contact information, and we'll add it in. Heather's been making posts thanking people, so we'll let people know the North Dakota News Cooperative is a way to reach you. And thank you,
oh yeah, I can
everybody.
give that one too. Here, I'll give you my,
The website.
well, I'll give you, hold on a second. This is my regular work mail with the ND's News Co-op. And it's just, yeah, the website's just newscoopnd.org, I think. Yep, newscoopnd.org.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'm sure I'll be talking to you again for stories on the horses, hopefully. And I look forward to your email later on.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.